So we are going to have a Thinkers Gala for this evening, which is fascinating because we have a hugely important topic and hugely important guests. And I remember a famous saying from Vladimir Lenin. Basically, he said, there are decades where nothing happens, yet there are weeks where decades happen. This is exactly the situation today. Just look at the past 2-3 weeks. So many things and events have happened, which we are going to discuss. So today we are going to have two distinguished guests. One is Professor Sergei Karaganov, and he's one of the most influential strategic thinkers in Russia and the key policy advisor to successive Russian presidents, including Yeltsin and Vladimir Putin. So without much ado, Professor Karaganov. It's okay.
Okay.
Good. Go this way. Okay. Take care. Good. Good. Can sit there. Yeah. Good.
I mean,
you can sit down.
Something got broke there.
Anyway, it's okay. Good.
Happy to be with you. I mean.
So I introduce our next distinguished guest, Dr. Ian Bremmer, the founder and president of Eurasia Group, one of the leading global think tanks. So without much ado, Dr. Ian Bremmer, you will be online with us. Please. Great. And indeed, I just read the report by his group, which is fascinating. Our top risks 2026. And the very first paragraph starts with 2026 is a tipping point year. So what a coincidence, because we planned this gala end of last year. We thought of this title, Tipping Point. Eurasia Group also used the title. Without pre-consultation across this vast ocean, we came to the same conclusion. Tipping point is here, right at this moment. And then the report says it's time of a great geopolitical uncertainty. Not because there is imminent conflict between the two biggest powers, the USA and China. That isn't even a top risk. It's a red herring this year only, yeah. Actually, we'll come to this question for you, but before I go to Dr. Bremen, I will come to Professor Karaganov first. And before I start, I must say, in all honesty, at this particular time of history, somehow, whether Europe or United States, there is so much politically correctness. It's not easy to have a senior Russian scholar and a senior American scholar or European scholar talk to each other in a candid way, exchange of views. So at least at this moment, Guancha here, and in Shanghai, in China, we provide forum. Despite online, we can still ask each other candid and tough questions if necessary, have a meaningful exchange of views. So my question for my friend, Professor Sergei Karaganov, I remember in 2024, you were moderating this dialogue with President Putin in this famous St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And you raised a rather sharp question. Literally, you said, we are now in St. Petersburg. As we all know, it's the Peter the Great who was looking to Europe, to the West. So Russia decided to establish this huge work, building a new city, second capital. Now in Russia, so much talk about looking east. You ask Vladimir Putin whether Russia should have a third capital in the Far East. I remember he gave a candid answer. At that time, he said, roughly, he said, you have a point, but we cannot do it all the way, planned economy, or created by an order, administrative order. We have to do it naturally through market force or other forces. I know in the end, it became discussion in Russia. So my question is for you. Now, you are very much known in China as an advocate of Eurasian civilization. And Vladimir Putin himself also identified Russia as a civilizational state. The point is, to what extent this whole idea of Russian as a unique civilization, different from the West, from the rest, is felt and is held in Russia as a whole. As in the minds of many, whether in China or outside China, Russia is sometimes torn between what's called the pro-the-West or Europhile and the Eurasianists. So how to explain this to Chinese audience, international audience?
It has been always internal strife within Russia, whether we are European or non-European, or a bridge between. The debate is still there, but it is fading away because we more and more understand that we are a unique Eurasian, Northern Eurasian civilization. I would say even not a civilization only, but a civilization of civilizations, because we unite many within our country and our hearts. We unite many religions, many civilizations, many nations. We are the most multi-ethnic, multinational, multi-religious country. So we are Russian. So sometimes even President Putin says that I'm a Russian Uzbek, I'm a Russian Tatar, etc., etc. We are all Russians. First. Second, this war which has been unleashed in 22, but it started long before. We went into the open, have speeded up our self-identification as Eurasian power. My view, which I put forward, is that we're much more Asian. We're culturally European, because for 300 years we were very open to Europe, but politically and spiritually we're Asian. And let me remind us, you and our audience, that Russia, when it emerged as a state, have taken its spiritual core from the south, from Palestine. From there we took Christianity. From further east, from the Arab world, we took Islam, which is a very part of our identity. The third element is Buddhism. We also took it from the East. And our political system, although not many people want to acknowledge that, we inherited from the greatest empire of them all, which at one point ran both China and Russia, the great Mongol empire of Genghis Khan. So, I mean, politically we are Asian, spiritually we are Southern Asian too, Culturally, we are multicultural, but largely European. But we are now growingly at ease with this new situation because previously it was believed to be Asian to be backward, at least in the minds of my competitors. Now Asia is on the rise, so we are proud to start to call us Asians, or Eurasians, if you wish.
Okay, great. So we come to you, Dr. Bremen. In your top risks report for this year, the top world risk is a bit surprising. It's the United States. It's called the US political revolution. As I check your report, top three, number three is the Donroe Doctrine. And as we have all seen not long ago, a few days ago, this kidnapping of Venezuelan President Maduro. So this seems, there is a link between these two. America's political system, this so-called revolution, and also the Monroe Doctrine or Donroe Doctrine. And so in terms of international affairs, relations, geopolitics, to what extent this particular act of kidnapping reveals for us, for me at least, I think it's tactically, it's quite a success. But most probably, in the eyes of many people, strategically, it could be a huge mistake. And so what were the implications of this particular act and event for geopolitics, for US foreign policy? And then the second part of this question is in terms of domestic political system, as you mentioned, number one, American political revolution. Why the US system produce a leader like Donald Trump? Obviously, happy country don't produce this kind of leader. And how the whole check and balance system work, you cannot check this kind of behavior. So that's it's one question with two parts. Thank you.
Sure. Well, I'll start with the second. And thank you. It's good to see both of you again. I am very happy to engage in front of live audiences with people from Russia and Europe and China. I think it's essential to do so. By the way, so does President Trump. Biden didn't want to pick up the phone and talk to Putin, and Trump did. And Trump invited him to Anchorage, and it wasn't successful, but at least he tried. And I think it's essential that we maintain more communications directly and speak honestly and openly in front of each other. And I think it's wonderful that you're doing that live in Shanghai. I'm sorry I can't join you in person. Now, why does the United States develop such a president? Twice, of course. And it was the biggest political comeback of American history from January 6th, when you had protesters storming the Capitol, to Trump being reelected 4 years later. Why would that happen? It's because Trump is not the cause. Trump is the symptom. He is the beneficiary. He is an accelerant of larger and larger numbers of American people that do not support the old U.S. role in the global order, a global order the United States set most of the rules for. They don't support the free trade architecture. They don't support the forever wars in Vietnam or Iraq or Afghanistan. They don't support the relatively open immigration posture. And they don't support the promotion of democracy or rule of law. And so that is the pushback that you are seeing. And this is not isolationism. This is unilateralism. Unilateralism that is prioritized in the Western Hemisphere with the so-called Donroe Doctrine, but that does not express the limit of American ambition, as you see with arms sales in Taiwan, or as you see with Trump's military plans and threats in Iran. following the instability there. Now, the second question you asked me was about Venezuela and the Donroe Doctrine. I agree tactically. It was an extraordinary success. It displayed American military capabilities that surely President Putin wished he had when he invaded Ukraine back in February of 2022. That was much less successful. Zelensky would be dead or in prison today if he could have done that. Maduro was in prison in New York City. Whether it is seen as successful strategically or not, I will tell you that what presidents and leaders say publicly to Trump is very different from what they say privately. Trump will be going to Davos in another week. There is a record, some 90 leaders, heads of state traveling from around the world to Davos. Those numbers are much higher after they announced that President Trump was coming. And they all want to know, when is Trump going to be there? Because that's when we want to be there. And publicly, they will all talk about how extraordinary he is as a leader, because they're scared of him, because they don't want to get into a fight with him. And you saw all the Europeans nervously monitoring the situation, and you saw very little public pushback. The exception, of course, has been China. China, after Trump put Liberation Day tariffs on China, expecting the Chinese would bend the knee, the Chinese did not rush for the phone to say, how do we cut a deal? Instead, they reciprocated with their own tariffs. The United States put export controls on semiconductors, and the Chinese put licensing controls on rare earths and critical minerals. And Trump recognized that the Chinese uniquely had a level of economic leverage versus the United States that forced the Americans into a very different posture than they have with Iran or Venezuela or the Europeans or Canada or Mexico. So that's the way I would answer those two questions.
Thank you. And another question for you, as there are so many crises one after another, indeed, it's a kind of tipping point. For one thing, following from this Venezuela crisis, Russian oil tanker was seized by American and British, whatever, Navy. And there also, Ukrainian side attempted drones attack on the residence of Vladimir Putin, etc. And Professor Karaganov, you are known for being an advocate of, or discussing at least, this problem of what you call the weakened effect of nuclear deterrence. And do you think this kind of crisis leading towards a kind of a tipping point for war escalations and even escalation towards nuclear conflict?
Well, we have been, the world have been driven towards a third world war for quite some time, mostly by the actions of first United States of America, and then Europeans. And I am still very much concerned that we are still on the slippery slope. Thanks God when we showed force, and we showed that we will be ready, if necessary, to use nuclear weapons in Europe. Americans, even during the Biden administration, started to withdraw from the war which they had unleashed in Ukraine. And so it was a kind of a promise. However, whether the United States or President Trump could deliver on this promise is unclear. First, because of the internal situation in the United States, and second, because he's also at the same trying to start to withdraw from overextension in which United States found itself due to this globalist imperial policies of the previous decades. but he still wants to interfere, like in Iran, like in Venezuela, and above all, I mean, he or his military, I don't know, dare to arrest a ship under the Russian flag. And there are many other issues of international banditry, not only by the United States, but also especially Europeans. So sooner or later, if this tendency is not stopped, and I hope it will not, it will be stopped. If needed, it will be stopped by us, by force. But if that is not stopped, it will lead us to a third world war. We are still on the slippery slope. But there is a hope, especially because of this, some signs of Russian American detente. But still, I mean, the signs are very, these lights are very weak. And we in Russia, many of us in Russia say continuously that American administration, even with allegedly good-willing Trump, is totally unreliable, and we have to continue with policy of harsher deterrence, if needed. And if needed, we should escalate in Europe, but hopefully we wouldn't follow American path, and we wouldn't bomb out, say, a European ally of the United States, though some of the European allies of the United States deserve bombing.
And how most Russians look at this U.S. act of kidnapping Venezuela President Maduro? What's the general feeling of the Russians?
At first, with amazement, because it was really weird, something weird, and something strange happened. Not only that kidnapping, but how, when, how come that in a country so well armed and with such strong military force, I mean, a president could be kidnapped from his own offices. There is something weird. But other than that, it is, I'm not an official, but it's a sign of further decline of any thinkable order in world affairs. We are made a huge new move towards the rule of jungle. But if there is a rule of jungle, our American partners, hopefully partners, will have to understand that in the rule, if others will start to play like in general, Americans are much more vulnerable.
That's true.
Than Russia is, 10 times more vulnerable, and 5 times more vulnerable than China is. So I think that I hope that Americans will come to their senses, as they seemed to have come to their senses because they started to withdraw from the Ukrainian debacle, which they eventually actually started. But hopefully realism will come back, or it will have to impose that realism by creating severe problems. But we do not want to create severe problems for the United States. We want a correct relationship. We're now fighting a war in Ukraine against Europe, not the United States. But previously it was the war against the West. Hopefully, the United States will get out of this quagmire.
And personally, I think it's a huge blow to so-called the rule-based international order or liberal order. It's no longer there. It's a huge blow to America's so-called soft power. It's a huge blow to America's alliance system, whatever, and more. Something the United States will pay dearly in the end. That's my personal observation. Now, my question for, again, for Ian Bremmer, as your organization follows closely major events across the world, you may know soon after this Venezuela crisis, China has actually applied a sweeping ban on exporting dual-use materials to Japan. It's a sweeping. It's all dual-use items, including technologies, services, goods, etc., vis-à-vis Japan, as Japan is a close U.S. ally in Asia. And so it's also interpreted by some people here as well as a warning to the United States. Please don't hurt China's interests in Venezuela or elsewhere in Latin America or even beyond that. So what would be your take on this kind of interpretation?
I would not read more into it. The U.S. and China, their bilateral relations are better today than they were a few months ago. Just in the last few hours, the U.S. Department of Commerce took off restrictions they were imposing on Chinese drones in the United States. The Chinese are engaging more proactively with the U.S. on fentanyl and the precursor chemicals. They're buying soybeans again. The Americans are exporting H-200 chips. There is a level of detente between the U.S. and China, which is very different from the way the Americans are engaging in Venezuela or the Chinese are engaging in Japan. And of course, Trump is very much a unilateral player. So if you want to talk to him, you engage with him directly. You don't do something to an ally that Trump doesn't care as much about. And this brings me back to Sergei Karaganov's point, where he said that the United States is no longer fighting a war in Ukraine, the Europeans are. You know, that sounds good, because if you say that, if you believe that, it means that the Russians only have to focus on the Europeans. But of course, the United States is still providing all the intelligence to Ukraine. They suspended it for about a week and a half, but then they started providing it again. Ukraine can't strike deep into Russia without that intelligence. The U.S. is selling all the weapons to the Europeans that are going on to Ukraine. Trump is fully aware of that. The United States is also pushing the Indians very hard. They said they won't do a trade deal with India unless India stops buying Russian oil. And we just saw Mukesh Ambani from Reliance stop his purchasing of Russian oil. So I think it is, I understand why the Russians would like the Americans no longer involved in the war in Ukraine. And Trump says he wants the war over. He didn't start it. It never would have started if he was president. Putin never would have done that. It was only because of Biden. You know, Trump wants to take a lot of credit for these things. But the reality of policy is that NATO is still there. The reality of policy is that the Americans and the Europeans are actually still working together on this war, and that the Europeans spending much more on defense than they used to, and the Europeans spending all the money on Ukrainian military capabilities means that for Trump, it looks like a win, that he doesn't have to tell the American taxpayers, you're not paying for it. There are no American troops, of course, that would come to provide Ukrainian security guarantees. And yet, the U.S. is still fully involved. So I would just be careful about how far we want to take that analogy. But I do, by the way, I do agree. I'd say one more thing, which is I agree completely with Professor Karaganov that the law of the jungle is ultimately not advantageous to the United States. It is advantageous more to China and Russia. Why is that? Because, I mean, objectively, the U.S. economy is the biggest. America's military capabilities are greater. But the U.S. president is not the strongest. You know, Trump overturned so much of what Biden did. Biden overturned what Trump did before him. And when there's a new president in the United States in 2029, they will turn back again on many of the policies we're discussing right now. So around the world, you know, foreign leaders, they look at the United States and they say the president of the United States is not reliable. And maybe we don't like everything that Putin does, but we know that if they say something, they're much more likely to be consistent. Even Narendra Modi in India, much more likely to be consistent than what we expect from the United States. So I agree with Dr. Karaganov, Professor Karaganov, completely on that point.
And do you comment on this U.S. continued role in the Ukrainian war, whatever? No.
No, well, United States played a crucial role in the whole Ukrainian debacle. It started around 2004, 2003, when European leaders and Putin started to debate a possibility of a continental alliance. Then the Ukrainian card was started to play. There was a first coup d'etat, 1984, and then Ukraine had been pushed towards becoming anti-Russia. So Americans played a very important role in the unleashing of this crisis. But then, when the crisis, went into the open, Americans originally were the key force. But when we started to show that we could use nuclear weapons immediately, in spite of some original threats that if you use nuclear weapons against Europeans, we will do away with your ground forces with conventional weapons. The answer was, okay, but then we will bomb your bases in Europe with nuclear weapons. And Americans disappeared from the scene. The withdrawal started. Of course, now America, I agree completely with Dr. Bremer that now Americans are sitting, they're not participating actively. They are simply profiting. They are selling arms to poor and stupid Europeans who pay for them. Americans are giving some information. We are looking after that, but still we hope that Americans and eventually Europeans, though I don't believe that Europeans could understand anything now, because European elites are completely down and out in terms of their level of intellect. I hope that Americans will understand that if they will continue to support this war, even indirectly, then sooner or later, and it will be soon, the Russian legendary patience will dry up, and we will start an escalation. And what happens if Russia decides to punish one of European allies of the United States? The country will be defeated, and America will be humiliated, and Americans will do nothing to retaliate and could not do nothing to retaliate. And I hope that Americans will be going in the right direction, and that is getting out from this global role of a global villain, gradually withdrawing to the Western Hemisphere as they are starting to withdraw. One of the tenets of the policy, which I have been apologizing and I have been pushing in Russia, is to provide for dignified retreat of the United States towards the Western Hemisphere, but not, of course, in the way of kidnapping, leaders. I hope that United States in 10, 15 years, and we will continue, we will work together with our friends in China and with our friends in India and elsewhere, will help America to become normal, reasonable, great power, rather than this strange globalist, global hegemon, which it tried to be and failed.
In a way, I was in Europe 3 times last year, and the mood was really a bit, depressing. Not only the economic recession and other crises, but also this, for so many decades, Europeans were so proud of their being, having gone through the Enlightenment, Renaissance, so they represent the reason. But what's missing most today in Europe is the reason. They're not reasonable. They began to understand why the World War I, World War II all broke out in Europe. Not rational, that's the problem. I said to them, you look at the cause of the Ukrainian crisis. You made 5 eastward NATO expansions. If you stop at number 4, this crisis could be avoided, this conflict could be avoided. Yet, they say, we don't discuss that. I said, this is a problem, for Europeans.
Yeah. The Europeans have become, are becoming, just in front of our eyes, are becoming their main problem for the humanity. Again, they have been the main problem and the main source of wars, of the worst crimes of genocide, serial genocides of racism, colonialism, etc. Then they were beaten several times, especially during the Second World War, when they were, all of them, except for 1 or 2 countries which did not participate in the Hitler operation against Russia and partially against Britain. So they were punished, and they, for the time being, came to their senses. But then, because of 70 years of peace, which was provided by United States and Soviet Union, they developed something kind of a strategic parasitism first, and second, they are starting to return to their old habits, and that is, they are becoming the source of all evils of the world society. So it's not American task, but it is a Russian task this time, to teach them, hopefully not the final lesson, but if they continue, it will be the final lesson for Europe. Let me remind you, you know that I have been pushing for the change in Russian nuclear doctrine. And recently, President Putin made a further unofficial change. He said that if Europeans continue the war or else expand it, there will be no Europeans to talk to. It is quite a serious warning. I hope we will not have to deliver upon that warning, but for that we have to bring Europeans in senses back to the Europeans' mind. We face Europe which is run by a group of elites, which I would say which act like a group of mad dogs. In my conversation with Mr. Putin once, an open conversation, once I said, what would you do if you are attacked by a group of wild dogs? Would you hit them with a stick, or would you rather kill one of them? The answer went, the question went unanswered. But for me, the answer is obvious, that if they continue, we will have to punish them. But the United States, I think, are on the right track, getting out of it. And the better the sooner they will get out of it, because if not, there will be further humiliations down the road. America, let me remind you, us all, is much more vulnerable than China or Russia externally, because it has many bases, it has many assets abroad, while we do not have them.
And Dr. Weber, my question for you is also concerning Europe. In your annual report, Top Risks, Europe is also portrayed in the slightly somehow the gloomy picture. Could you elaborate a bit on your view of Europe in the coming years?
Sure, it's very much aligned with, I think, the threat posture that Dr. Karaganov is describing. You know, I mean, I don't think it's constructive to disparage them as people or as leaders, because that leads to dehumanization and it creates more conflict. But I think the threat that he recognizes is real. You know, Russia understands that NATO today is weaker in terms of America's political guarantees than it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. When the United States threatens Denmark, saying they need Greenland, that, of course, creates the potential for NATO to be fractured. Trump says, if I have to choose between NATO and Greenland, maybe I'll leave NATO. This is strategically the best thing that could happen to Russia. And again, I mean, you hear that this is, a choice that the Americans should take, that they should retreat to the Western Hemisphere, let them have Greenland too, but the Europeans then will be by themselves. And the Europeans, I think, understand that they've made a number of bets over the past decades. Dr. Karaganov refers to them as strategic parasitism. I would refer to it as a mistaken belief that rule of law and Western collective security and free trade would persist not just in the West, but would increase in coverage all over the world, that China would become more oriented towards that Russia would become more oriented towards that. They were wrong, completely wrong. And so as a consequence, here we are in 2026, and China is still China, and America doesn't want to spend the money and be responsible for it anymore. And Russia's still Russia, and now the Europeans are saying, oh my God, we need to spend on defense. We need to have real technology companies. We can't maintain the social contract the way we used to. So the Europeans are increasingly facing an existential crisis, because unlike China, unlike the US, unlike Russia, when we talk about Europe, we're not talking about a state. We're talking about a superstructure that has a lot of control on trade issues on the common market. But when you talk about defense, 27 separate countries. When you talk about, a banking system, 27 separate countries. And that makes the Europeans much more vulnerable, much weaker, including to some of America's favorite European players who happen to be some of Russia's favorite European players. Trump and Putin both prefer Viktor Orban to, say, Friedrich Merz. They both prefer the Alternatives for Deutschland to the centrist government presently in place. They prefer the National Rally in France to Macron. They prefer Nigel Farage and the Reform Party to Labor or the Conservatives. And that is a very unusual alignment. Trump, J.D. Vance, Elon Musk, they all want to see a weaker EU. They all supported Brexit. And that aligns with what the Russians would prefer in Europe as well. And so that really creates, I would say, a siege mentality. The Europeans deeply concerned that they may not have a European Union in 5 or 10 years' time. This is, in some ways, this is the strategically most vulnerable, interesting, and dangerous part of the world in the next decade, for reasons that I think Dr. Karaganov has very clearly articulated one component of, one view of.
Okay, and now we come to another important topic, the relation between China, Russia, and United States. All these three great nations have three strong leaders. And Donald Trump respects strong leaders. That's his style. And he also respects strong country. That's also his style. Now, what happens is, with the Ukrainian war, indeed, look at the world. It's indeed very controversial. Even within China, there are pros and cons, etc. Yet, an important position held by Russia, that is, Russians want to change this world order from unipolarity to multipolarity. This is widely accepted and shared by virtually all members, all Global South countries. As a result, even this former Prime Minister of Italy, Berlusconi, said Russia is being isolated by the West, and the West is being isolated by the rest, because virtually no major southern country joined the sanctions against Russia. So I describe Russia with this controversial war as a revolutionary. They want to overthrow the unipolarity. And China is slightly different. China thinks this system, this order is a mixed thing, you know. So China can maximize its advantages and try to reduce the disadvantages. So China is a reformer. We want to change the system, but in a reformist way. But both revolutionary and reformer prefer forward-looking. We need something different, something new, a multipolar world order. So this is widely shared, both within China, within Russia, and within the global South. Now with Donald Trump, I would call him an abandoner, because he saw this unipolarity being too costly for the United States. Industry hollowing out, even these color revolutions, whatever, cost dearly, not much gains for United States. He said, we abandon that. But difference between Donald Trump's United States and Russia and China is he's backward looking. He looked back to 19th century. And so mercantilism, tariff war, and kidnapping, this imperialism, colonialism, whatever. So this is a problem today. We are facing with already a multipolar world, yet without multipolar world order. So that's my brief comment. I would like to hear views from you first, and then from Dr. Brammer. Yes.
Well, this even members of the Trump administration now admit that we are moving towards a multipolar world, though they sometimes latently or try to act as if they are still the hegemon. So I hope that they will go with our help, with Russian and Chinese help, in the right direction. So what should be their ideal world order for, say, 20 years from now? First of all, in order to achieve that, we have to stop on this slippery slope towards World War III. And above all, we have to stop Europeans, because they are objectively, subjectively, or simply they do not understand what they're doing. They're pushing the world towards a disaster. Again, after unleashing 2 world wars in the previous century, they're pushing the world towards the 3rd World War. And we have to stop them. I hope that Americans will eventually understand that too, because we are fighting in Ukraine, not Ukraine at all. Ukrainians are cannon fodder. We have been fighting the West. Now we are fighting more Europe, as always we have done. And we twice taught them a lesson during the Napoleonic War and during the Second World War. I don't want this time that we teach them another lesson, because it could be the final lesson for Europe. But I hope we need American help too. And if we are, but in the 10 years from now, 15 years, Europe will be not on the table. Hopefully they will survive. There are many states. I mean, they will be warring each other in small ways, as they always do. But there will be a different, absolutely different situation. And I think that Americans are getting going in the right direction. They first tried to undermine China, pressuring them. Then they tried to defeat strategically Russia together with the Europeans. Now they're backing from pressuring China. They're gradually, hopefully, going in the right direction, backing from fighting Russia. And so maybe in 10 years, United States would become a normal power, a normal great power. I mean, still, of course, a very important one, but China will be number 1 economically, and even militarily will be we will be one of the biggest military powers. We are still relatively small. And then we'll have to find a way, three of us plus India, to start to provide the world with such public goods as global enlightened leadership. It is high time that we do it, because there are many problems which we face which we do not even want to acknowledge. One is simple: climate change. I mean, everybody has been talking about that. Almost nothing is done seriously, except on the national level. The second biggest problem which we face, and we should not want even to discuss seriously, is, of course, the fact that the modern capitalist system, which involves all of us, even socialist China, profit-oriented and oriented towards endless consumption, starts to undermine the basis of human life, the earth. And the third problem, which we have to face together, is, of course, the fact that the modern technologies are starting to undermine the human. I mean, we could face the degradation of the human in human, in persons, and we have to face that, because and maybe our intellectual classes and maybe then our governments could provide the world with an idea how to save the human from dehumanization. We see what happened in Europe already. They were the first, where this new pseudo ideologies, LGBTism, ultra-feminism, rejection of history reign in. I mean, these are anti-human ideologies, and they are threatening all of us. And hopefully, United States will continue to come to their senses with Trump, or after Trump, or after Trump, and we, together with you, are already on the right track.
But what's your take on this relation between the three big powers?
Well, as you see, Russia's concern is overwhelmingly about Europe. It's much less global in reality. It's all-consuming in that regard. And it's also much more expressed through military power, where the Russians are a world-class global power, but it is not supported by an economy that can continue to develop it at that level. The Chinese, on the other hand, are investing in technologies, energy technologies, including to respond to climate change, in AI technologies, and in supply chain at global scale. So when President Trump met with Xi Jinping in Busan, Trump talked about a G2. He did not talk about a G3. And China is seen increasingly very much as a peer of the United States on the global stage, and nobody else is. And that is interesting. China publicly has not responded to that, and I think that's wise for the Chinese to do. I think what China is doing, which makes a lot of sense for themselves, is they are thinking about long-term policies that make sense for their influence and their stability, not just in their backyard, but globally. And of course, the world is already a multipolar order if we think about the global economy. I mean, Trump can have a Donroe doctrine, and the US is completely dominant militarily across the Western Hemisphere. And yet, China is the dominant economic trade partner of most countries in Western Hemisphere, as well as with most countries around the world. And ultimately, if you want to be a global power in the 21st century, not in the 19th century, you need to build the global technologies that reflect the 21st century. And right now, I only see two countries that are doing that at scale. I see the Chinese and I see the Americans. I don't see anyone else building those technologies. And if you're not building those technologies, you will be relying on those technologies from other countries. And who is more successful at it? Who is most successful at it? How much will be determined by the state? How much by the private sector companies themselves? Which of those technologies will be breakout and most successful? Which strategies? Because the Chinese strategy on AI is very different from the US. The US is focused more on the large language models and consumer use. Chinese are focused much more on industrial and national security use and open source. The Americans are focused on being the world-class oil, gas, and coal fossil fuel power. The Chinese are focused much more on being an electro state and on developing the wind, the solar, the nuclear, and the supply chain, the batteries as well, behind it to power it. Now, I actually think if you made Ian Bremmer make a bet on which of those strategies looks more successful for the next 10 or 20 years, I think that the Chinese strategic bets seem to be smarter and more consistent, in part because the United States changes its bets frequently. But of course, the US also is less determined by its government. It's more determined by its private sector, and that is an efficiency advantage. So it's hard to make a strong call on which of these two countries ends up being advantaged. But again, if what we really care about is the future of the new technologies that are going to change humanity and change power on the planet, there are really only two bets being made. And although the Soviets were world-class in many of those ways, in the investment in human capital, the investment in science, it is a shell of what it was 30 years ago. And I think that indeed is one of the reasons why the Russian government is so unnerved and upset by the way that global power has changed over the course of that time.
Okay, and we still have 5 minutes. I will make a brief comment on Asia to see whether it's hopeful or not, because I think perhaps Asia can bring more hope to the world. Indeed, that's very important. I remember when Munich Security Report, that was for the year before, was entitled Lose-Lose. In fact, it's about lose-lose in Europe. They lost peace, development, prosperity. That's it. But actually, it's not the case for Asia. In Asia, I just confine Asia at this particular moment for the sake of discussion to China plus ASEAN, which has a population 3 times larger than European population, than EU population. Yet, we have maintained largely peaceful environment for 4 decades, despite small skirmishes between Cambodia, Thailand, which for a few days and then pacified. On the whole, it's peaceful. I think 3 reasons. Very different approach, European approach and Asian approach. For European approach, it's good guy, bad guy. It's a NATO philosophy. Keep America in, keep Russia out, keep Germany down. But in Asia, it's totally different. It's 3 pillars. Pillar for development. We help each other, focusing on improving people's living standards. That's the key message. Consensus, no major disagreement. Security pillar, which means respect sovereignty of each nation and try our best to use peaceful means to resolve differences. And then civilizational pillar. We talk about the ASEAN wisdom, Chinese wisdom, Asian wisdom, say 2 steps forward, 1 step backward. It's okay, so as we are moving forward. Negotiations, although slow, yet it will work out better results in the end. So in the end, you find that what have happened is both Southeast Asia, the ASEAN region, and Central Asia used to be described as geographical curse for so many, many decades long. Yet today, they are described very often as geographical blessing. Central Asia now become a bridge between Asia and Europe. despite all the problems, yet on the whole, thanks to China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and Russia also made important contributions. Same with Southeast Asia. No, it's on the whole, it's a center of development and prosperity. So I think perhaps, looking east is a global trend. You go to Middle East, go to Africa, go to Latin America, they all talk about this. Of course, Donald Trump has his own mind, but I agree with you. From Chinese point of view, when debate was still going on, who will be the next president, Trump or Harris? We predicted it will be Donald Trump. So back 4 years ago, we said very certainly, quite possible, because Chairman Mao famously said, he said, I like the right wing in the United States because they are slightly more candid about the American problems. But the prescriptions by Donald Trump is very often wrong and misleading. That's a message we want to convey through you to our American counterparts. Thank you very much. It's actually 9 o'clock. So let's jointly applaud this conversation. Thank you. Okay, that's quite a day. What's the next? What's the protocol? 下一步是什么？下一个活动？抽奖是吧？
下一个活动是抽奖。
那
张老师还想跟我们现场观众互动一下吗？给大家一个提问的机会吗？
可以啊，有时间可以啊，大家可以提问。
我们给大家2个提问机会，好不好
？We got time, a bit more time for Q&A. 2 questions from the floor. 3, OK.
好，3个问题。好，大家抓住时间。
你们问的时候是说是问谁啊？你们说一下都可以哎。好。
抓住这个机会，这边有，好，我们先请这位。
自报一下家门啊！你能说英语吗？也可以说一下，如果
抱歉，
说中文也可以。OK。
英文不太好。张老师您好，就是我准备的问题是，现在全球正在进入一个加速的环节，然后我们的国家呢也在进入一个加速的环节。我想请问张老师，像我们现在这样的年轻人，怎么在国家和整个世界正在加速的环节上不掉队，跟上整个世界的节奏？谢谢张老师。
你这问题不够尖锐啊！我们要不这问题我待会儿私下回答你好不好？这问题 too easy， 我们问一个稍微带点
好，我们看
是这么好的嘉宾在。I said that question is being too polite. We need the tough questions for our distinguished audience. 不好意思啊。
喂。
好
啊。我问一下这个卡拉加诺夫先生，
那个你们谁能够翻译一下吗？待会
儿然后就谁帮我翻译一下，好吗？
不行，我就简单说一下。
就是你的意思是说，在未来将由中国、美国、俄国加上印度来这个管理世界啊？你在多大程度上相信这样的信念？另外，我也想问 Bram 先生，你同意他的观点吗
？So have you got the question? Not yet. Basically, it's a question for you about your concern, your belief that most probably in the end there will be China, United States, Russia, and India, 4 big powers that will run global affairs. And then he asked Dr. Bremer, do you share his view? Yeah.
Basically, I believe that 4 countries, especially if and when Russia finally wins this war, will not dictate, but should provide the world leadership. But this world leadership should be based not only on leadership in terms of bringing in more affluence, which is necessary, but above all, is in providing security for the whole world, and second, to provide for human development. One of the worst and most dangerous tendencies which we face and which we are all facing, including China, United States, to a less extent Russia, but still we too, is the degradation of the human, largely because of the development of technologies. Humans stop to think. Humans stop to read. Humans stop to think systematically. That is the problem which we have to face together, which is the biggest long-term problem I see for the world, apart from climate. And these 4 countries, with its intellectual capital, with its technological capital, and even with military capabilities, should provide for this common good for humanity. Because in 10, 15, 20 years, if we survive this transitional period, we shall be facing, really big problems with further climate change and the problems with the degradation of humans, of the mind. We see that in Europe already, when Europeans, formerly one of the leaders of the world intellectually, are run by, let's put it like,
poverty of ideas
by senseless pack of somebody. And that is the threat we all have to face. So, and I think people like yourself and Professor Bremer, could agree with me that this is the biggest threat for humanity: dehumanization and stupidity.
Do you want to make a brief comment on this particular issue?
I think technology is absolutely the biggest transformer. And I agree that dehumanization is a huge problem. I don't think it's a long-term problem. I think it's a medium-term problem. I think it's happening now. And the next decade will probably create wild changes in how we think about power. I agree that climate change is not going away, but the technology side is happening so much faster than climate change. And I guess the one thing I would say is we shouldn't just narrowly think about countries, India, Russia, the US, China, because when you have artificial intelligence, suddenly companies become much more important and powerful, individuals become much more important and powerful when they have those technologies themselves. So I'm not sure that the same way we think about international relations, where the principal and only things we talk about are these big governments jostling for global influence, I suspect it's going to look very different, much more complicated, much more chaotic, and it won't be just governments we're talking about in 10 years' time.
Okay.
But I could add to that is that 40 and 50 years ago, our senior friends like Joseph Nye, like Robert Cohen, etc., were saying that the governments will fade away, and instead that they will be run by transnational corporation and NGOs. Now we are talking about, the technical enthusiasts are talking about us being run by technologies. I said we should be run by ourselves. And for that, we have to develop ourselves and our younger generations so that they will not be reigned by technologies, but the high human spirit.
我们还有时间一个问题吗？可以啊。
喂，
谁来？
你好。
他已经站起来了。OK。
I have a question for Mr. Bremer and Ms. Karaganov. Okay. We know that under the rule of President Modi, India is a very ambitious nation. And India wants to be an important role in the world, even a pole in the world. So my question is, what level will India get Will India get even replace the role of Russia, even the US? Thank you. Spasiba.
India,
Well,
optimistic or pessimistic?
India is an underestimated player in world affairs. And I think that India in the next 20 years will make a great leap forward, both because of it resurrects its deep culture, one of the sources of the world's great world civilization. But in order to achieve that, they will have, of course, to adjust their government. It is a bit too chaotic sometimes, but Modi is moving in the right direction, first. And second, I think that countries like India, China, and Russia, and eventually with the help and with the participation of the United States, should start to build a foundation of the new philosophy of nuclear deterrence in order to prevent war from slipping into endless conflicts. Because now we are living through a period whereas old types of deterrence have stopped to work, and we see that conflicts multiply. I think India, with its philosophy, peaceful philosophy, by the way, I mean, both United States, or 3 R's, the United States, China and Russia, have a much more militant philosophy, so have had, I mean, of course, previously. During the last 4 centuries, you became also a peaceful country, and you suffered for that. But now we are returning back to where you belong. But the philosophy, the Gandhi's philosophy, or the etc., peaceful philosophy, is also could be a great contribution to our common good. And I think that India, with its philosophical heritage, could be one of the leading countries in this quartet. So,
Dr. Bremer, are you optimistic as well about the prospects of India?
I am, because they're developing stable and constructive relations with most countries around the world. India, of course, is part of the Quad with the United States, and using that, they present themselves as Trump whisperers to a lot of other countries that are smaller. They have very good relations with the entire G7, with the exception of Canada, which doesn't matter that much. It's stabilized somewhat. India is seen as a leader of the global South and was very capable when they chaired the G20 meetings, while China says they're part of the global South, but is actually the principal creditor to the global South. So it's a very different relationship in that regard. And India's China relations and vice versa, which have been tense for lots of reasons, but both leaders have worked on stabilizing it more recently. So, I think that in many ways, India has this sort of global multi-vector policy, kind of like Kazakhstan, but a much more serious and strategic version of that, that helps them internationally. And with the exception of, sort of the India-Pakistan conflict, and you don't actually see the Indians involved in serious fights globally. Most people welcome Modi. They welcome Indian leadership. And also India, because they've had a strong leader as a democracy, but they still have had a strong leader for over a decade, there's been the ability to pursue very consistent economic reform. I mean, just in the last few days, they're now opening up the nuclear sector to private investment, insurance sector to private investment. These are they've started to improve their tax structure. They've taken corruption out of their system at a time when so many countries are having challenges with that. So yeah, I think that India is facing a very bright future. And I think all of that, we shouldn't be surprised that they're looking at 7-8% growth in 2026.
Okay, one final question from here.
最后一个问题，我们给到俄罗斯的朋友好吗？好的。
抱歉啊。
Hello, I have a question regarding the Arctic trade route. So how do you think the China-Russia relationship and how it will impact on the world with the future development of the Arctic trade route if all the cargo and all of the logistics will move to the northern sea and this way?
And maybe Dr. Brammer first. Have you heard the question? It's about the Arctic trade route and its relation between United States, China, Russia.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a strategic advantage that the Russians will increasingly have, is that they are an Arctic power, and increasingly we're going to see that ice cap melt, and it's a much faster route. There's also a lot of resources to be exploited, but the other countries in the Arctic, at least as of now, are all aligned with the United States. And we're talking about the Canadians, we're talking about the Europeans and the US as well. So, and what China can do as an Arctic power when they're not directly on the Arctic, that's certainly why we see the Chinese talking a lot more about investment. And it's also leading to some of this conflict you have right now on Greenland, which is, it seems silly, but at the same time, there is some strategic thinking behind it. My hope is that this will get resolved peacefully between the United States, Denmark, and its European allies. But there are no such guarantees, and Trump is president for 3 more years, so we'll have to see that play out.
Should I say a few words on that?
Yeah, well, I'm quite relaxed about the future of Arctic. I hope that we will have enough common sense not to start kind of a belligerent attitude which our, especially European colleagues or some American colleagues are trying to impose on us. And in principle, we will be the leading nation in Arctic, but we are now thinking as a nation about creating a new web of north-south corridors connecting Arctic with Southern Asia through China. And that will be the future. And the future also will be, of course, in development of the endless resources of Siberia. We only scratch on the surface of these resources. But sooner or later, under Russian control, we shall be inviting our hopefully friends, including Americans, including, of course, Chinese, including Koreans, to develop these resources. We are one of the few countries in the world, if not the one country in the world, which in Siberia has access of pure water. Actually, one of the reasons of the warming of the Arctic Ocean is that the flow of clear water from the rivers is increasing and it's melting ice. But this water could be used for development of Asia, maybe through production of water-intensive products, maybe even through direct sale of water. And I'm not, but I'm pretty sure that we shall strongly be against remilitarization of the Arctic. We've made enough mistakes, stupid mistakes in the past, remilitarizing many areas which shouldn't have been done. That Arctic should be the area of peace and common development.
And I just make one brief comment on Donald Trump's policy towards this whole Greenland. And from the perspective of United States as a democracy, so-called, why there is no way to help him to a bit enlightened the United States already have enough military bases there. It will have more bases with wishes without physically controlling, grabbing that particular island. So I don't know why you prefer this kind of physical occupation, imperialism, colonialism, which will arouse huge resentment across the world and break the European alliance, whatever. But Europeans will suffer from that. It's their own choice. And secondly, China and Russia are both civilizational states. We have a longer vision, much longer vision than Donald Trump, than in many ways the United States. From Chinese point of view, it's not always zero sum. It's not always ally, friend or foe. From a Chinese point of view, it's a friend or potential friend. Even from a Chinese point of view, Philippines is a troublemaker. But we did not use force. We use only water cannons. And we try to give them some warning. But with longer vision, Philippine policy goes ups and downs. Eventually, they can become our friends. So I think if the nation like the United States can embrace this idea of win-win, in China, it's a daily life. It's every day people experience a win-win. It's part of civilization for thousands of years. So why can't the United States understand that? We just feel a bit puzzled.
Yes, as you know, I have been pushing for many years to easternize Russia, to move Russia towards east. Now I'm talking about Siberization of Russia, and I'm talking that I'm calling that Russia would embrace more Asian values and win-win, rather than European values, and this win or lose. So and I hope that Americans will become, in this case, also a nation rather than European power in many, many years. Though, of course, America is also a country of civilization, though it is closer to Europe than we are.
Professor Zhang,
Yes.
our last question for this gentleman. Okay, we have to stop our dialogue very soon, so short answer.
So, short answer.
I would ask a question to Dr. Ian Bremer. 我想问Bremer 先生一个问题。我是一个来自于半导体行业的从业者。I'm working as a semiconductor industry. 关于技术方面的，就是在过去的几十年，我们观察到，基本上流行起来的技术，它都不是最新的技术。比如说已经被储存很久了才被释放出来的，或者是已经被谈论很久才变得成熟的。In the past decades, we have observed that most of the technology we find blooming, but before that, it was not completely new technology. It might be stored in a very long queue to be released to the public, or it's just grow up to be take practical. 那在这个过程当中，就是技术的发展和这个存储以及逐渐的释放，我们经常观察到一个点。We often find that when the economic come out with some problem, some new technology just come out to everyone. 就是当发现可能经济出一些问题的时候，很多新技术会出来。那么在这些过程当中，我们在想，我刚注意到咱们那个Dr. Ian Bremer 反复强调，技术可能在将来的影响力，甚至可能比一些军事和政事更大。I heard from Ian Bremer that he has emphasized more than twice about the technology. It can be more effective to the politics or even the result of the war. But recently, we come to this stage. 最近我们大概到这样的一个阶段啊，就是 AI， 好像中美在打一个平手，似乎在打一个平手，或者是不相上下。那在maybe for the playground of AI, China and the U.S. may have a
直接问他这个问题好了。
Yeah.
For AI between China and United States, is there a competition? Who will win? Who is winning?
My question is, what is the next technology beyond this? What's the next competition after
Beyond
AI? What's your prediction? What's your
Sure about
prediction?
AI.
Yeah, I think AI is so early stage and so transformative. It'll affect every sector of the economy. It'll affect the security posture of the world, and it will change who human beings are as we engage with AI that is trained on our individual data. So we aren't even starting to think about that. But one thing that's very important to me is that the Americans and Chinese have a dialogue about it. It took us until 1962 in nuclear technology to realize that we almost blew each other up, and the Americans and the Soviets needed arms control. They needed a hotline. They needed to engage in cooperation, even though they didn't have mutual trust, and that was very dangerous. And we can't wait, as the Americans and Chinese, for a Cuban Missile Crisis moment on AI. We have to start engaging with each other now, and that's not happening today. I think that's unfortunate, and I think it's a danger.
Good. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much. It's a wonderful day. Thank you. 谢谢大家，非常感谢。Thank you.